This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Hello and welcome to The Edge, Trek FM show about Star Trek Discovery. I'm Mike, and today I'm joined by someone who should be familiar to anyone who listens to the network, Christopher Jones. How's it going, Chris?
It's going well, Mike. I hope I'm dressed appropriately. I've got on my white leisure suit. I've got my bell bottoms on. I grew my chest hair out for this show. I heard we're talking about disco.
Well, I don't see your medallion. Where's that?
I loaned it to Dr. McCoy because he got called to the Enterprise, and he didn't have a medallion, and I felt his outfit was a little bit lacking. I didn't want to disappoint Jim.
Okay, well, we'll let it slide this time, but next time, you better have the medallion.
All right, I'll make sure I'm ready.
Cool. So, we've been talking about Discovery on the network and on the Edge for a very long time, and we've covered pretty much everything there is to cover, all of the new info and all that stuff, but there's been something missing from this conversation for the most part. And that missing component is you. You know, as the publisher of the network, I think a lot of people want to know what your thoughts on Discovery are. And certainly you've talked about it, you know, with Larry and stuff like that on the Ready Room. But there's been a lot of further developments since that time. And we thought, you know, here we are. This episode is being released 2 days before Discovery begins, and we thought maybe before we actually embark on this new journey, we should get your thoughts on what we're about to see. So,
well, I've been here all along, Mike. I've just been on the other edge. I've been waiting for you guys to come over here and pick me up.
Sorry, we were on the wrong edge.
You're on the wrong edge. Yes.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, Larry and I have talked about it on the Ready Room a number of times, but I haven't been doing the Ready Room very often for the past year. Most people who are regular listeners probably know it's because of all my eye surgeries and some health issues I've had. So we haven't talked. I think the last Ready Room that Larry and I did was at least 2 months ago. And the bulk of the news about Discovery has come out since then. So we were really speculating more at that time. To be honest, I've kind of been avoiding the news. I haven't been reading every article that comes out. I certainly have not been following every discussion thread that's going on, although I do peek in from time to time. I am not at the point that I was when First Contact came out, where I was completely trying to avoid any spoilers because I didn't want to know anything about what was going to happen. I'm not at that point, but I am of the mindset that I want to just wait until it comes on TV and see what they've put together rather than spending huge amounts of time speculating on the visuals that I'm seeing. Of course, being a podcaster, I like to speculate on what might be, but that's a little bit different than really breaking down the details of every little image that comes out from CBS, right?
Yeah, and, you know, I totally understand what you're saying, and, you know, as I've mentioned, I'm sure elsewhere on the air, like, I've over the past, maybe like 7 or 8 months have made like a conscious effort to like not watch any trailers for any movies, like not get into any info so that, for example, I'm going to see the new Star Wars movie. Okay. There's no doubt in my mind that I will see the new Star Wars movie. So why do I need to watch the trailer, right? I mean, what's it going to tell me? Like, oh, now there's absolutely nothing that I can get from it aside from like hype. And
Yeah.
I've sort of like adopted that philosophy across the board, with the one exception being Discovery. And I think part of it is because of doing this show, but another part of it is just sort of like thinking back to that First Contact era, or maybe more the Generations era, where I didn't know what a spoiler was or cared what a spoiler was, and I was just trying to get all the information I could as quickly as I could. And certainly I'm trying to balance that out, between staying informed without being spoiled. And it's a very fine line to walk, and I feel like maybe I've, tipped too far into knowledge of what's going on.
Well, you kind of have to when you're hosting a show about the show that's coming up.
Exactly. And I've kind of just, I've decided like whatever. I've made my peace with that. But
yeah,
I admire you for not doing that, because I imagine once the two of us sit down to watch this show over the weekend or whatever, you'll probably get the more rewarding experience out of it because you're going into it, fresh.
Well, I will tell you, Mike, it's a little bit easier for me than it is for you, since CBS geo-blocks the videos that they put on StarTrek.com. And if you're outside of the US and you click it to play it, it just tells you that you can't watch this video. So it's a little bit easier to avoid things.
I don't understand why anyone would want to, promote something that they've created. It seems like kind of a weird concept. So,
well, especially when they've created this and it's going to be shown in 188 countries. Why do you geo-block the videos?
Because you guys are getting it later than everyone else, like by at least 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah, so it's like the time warp thing going on there. I will tell you, Mike, you said that in the First Contact era, you didn't know what a spoiler was. I'll tell you what a spoiler is. A spoiler is a giant image of the Enterprise E on the top of the gas pump when you pull in the gas station to fill up your car after you've spent months avoiding any kind of news, any kind of images for the movie, and you innocently pull in to fill up your tank, and right on the top of the pump is the Enterprise E because the gas station had some kind of special tie-in going on. So that's what a spoiler is, Mike.
So you wanted to be like when they have that amazing shot, the first shot of the Enterprise
right.
E, you wanted that to be your first.
Of all the things I didn't want to know, I did not want to know what the Enterprise was going to look like before I went into the theater.
That's pretty awesome. And I imagine it, generally speaking, would be a lot easier to do back then because you didn't have the internet and stuff like that. But
right.
Oh, well, maybe next time.
Don't underestimate CompuServe, Mike.
Do you know what Discovery looks like?
I do, yes.
Okay, all right, okay. So you've obviously talked a lot about all the other Star Trek shows, on the Ready Room, and in addition to, things like The Orb and everything, of course. But, the Ready Room covers every single iteration of Star Trek. So they've made a big deal about how Discovery is going to be taking place in the prime timeline, taking a place in the canon, really, even though, they've also said, like, who cares about canon if you're telling good stories? There's that whole thing. But I wanted to kind of ask you about stuff related to that. Now, this is obviously something which we've known forever, even though they keep on having to assure people, because no one believes them. But this takes place in the prime timeline, which was kind of a surprise to me. I'll be honest. Now that I've heard their reasoning, it makes total sense to me. But when it was first announced, I was like, why are you doing that? That seems like you're going backwards. How do you feel about Discovery taking place in the Prime timeline?
Well, I always felt that the new series had to take place in the Prime timeline because Star Trek is the Prime timeline. For most fans, except for the newest fans who came in after the 2009 film, when you think of Star Trek, you think of that history, which is now in its 51st year. And all of it, except for 3 movies and a bunch of comic books, is in the Prime timeline. And you can have this explanation for how the timeline split and you got into these Abrams versus Kelvin timeline movies. That's fine. And I can accept that because I'm very flexible in these things. But I just don't think that is what most people think of when they think of Star Trek. And when you take Star Trek and you put it back on television, I think that you need to be building upon that half century of storytelling and enriching that story because that's what fans love. And it's not just about, and this is one of the big criticisms of the J.J. Abrams films, Star Trek isn't just about dressing up in colorful uniforms and flying around in a ship called Enterprise and being part of Starfleet and the Federation, right? Star Trek is about telling this rich story about a possible future history. At the time that it was conceived, in 1966, it was telling the story of our future. In 2017, we have to look at it as this is the story of a possible future that we could have had, right? Because there are too many events in the Star Trek timeline that have already passed and they didn't happen. So now it is an alternate future from where we are. I just think that that's what fans love, the fact that it was so rooted in us and then it's been built over half a century. And when they want more stories on television, what they want is they want more stories from that period, that future that we may have followed. And if you go into an alternate timeline from that, well, that's certainly not us, right? That's a branch off of the original vision that Gene had. So that's just why I felt that it had to be Prime timeline. Of course, the aesthetics of it, it's very Kelvin. And a lot of people are complaining about that. And I think it makes it difficult for them to reconcile the fact that this is taking place in the Prime timeline. Yeah, I know it kind of looks like the Kelvin timeline, but it's being made in 2017. It's not being made in 1966 or 1987 or 1993. So, of course, it's going to look different. It's going to reflect the visual style of television and cinema and science fiction today. It's sort of inevitable. And I think that you just have to accept that and not get so caught up on the visuals that it pulls you out of the actual story.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that, I mean, for me personally, the aesthetics of the Kelvin timeline were never that. They were never the aesthetics of the Kelvin timeline. They were the aesthetics of, 21st century filmmaking.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
Right. So, I mean, it only makes sense. And I don't know. I mean, my personal thoughts on the whole, Kelvin versus Prime thing is that while I agree with everything that you're saying, there was a conscious effort with the reboot to sort of get back to the basics. I mean, I keep on thinking of it in terms of like Batman. Like nobody wants to see a bunch of Batman movies with Dick Grayson as Batman or something like that. You know what I mean? They don't want Azrael as Batman. They want, Bruce Wayne. And obviously, Star Trek has become something much larger than Kirk and Spock and McCoy, but I do see the draw of returning to that and, sort of exploring what it is on a character level that makes Star Trek Star Trek. And I kind of just felt like once you make that leap to go back to something which is very cluttered in a sense is kind of a mistake because you're limiting the types of stories that you can tell. But of course, a way to get around that, and I think a thing which a lot of fans were hoping for and expecting was that this show would be set post TNG, but it's
exactly.
not.
Yeah.
So I guess that's my next question for you, which is, what do you think about the placement of this series in the timeline?
Right. So in everything that I said, when I said that it had to be prime timeline, I do agree with you that I expected that it would probably be set after Voyager, not in the middle of the timeline, not between Enterprise and the original series, and not at the same time as The Cage. That was a little bit surprising, and I think it does present a lot of, well, difficulties, I guess I would say, creatively, to tell stories that are set in that time, and especially to tell stories that don't ruffle the feathers of the existing fans. I mean, as far as it being set in this time period, I don't know. I mean, that's the decision that they've made, so it's not up to me to worry about it or say, well, you shouldn't do that because I think it's a bad idea. I don't really think it's a bad idea. I think that there are plenty of stories to be told in the gaps throughout the timeline. I think you could do a series that is set after the TOS movies, but before The Next Generation. Without a problem, you could tell stories in there. You just have to be careful. It is important in Star Trek to remember the events that have been referenced, even if we didn't see them on screen. So the Romulan War, for example, we never got to see that on Enterprise, but if Enterprise had continued for 7 seasons, at some point, they would have needed to reference the Romulan War. Otherwise, they're ignoring what is only a blip on the screen, but had become a very, very important part of Star Trek lore. So you just have to be aware of those things, and then you can choose to fill them in or not fill them in, but you should try not to contradict them. Naturally, you're going to contradict some things. It's inevitable because it's such a rich history that's been established, but you have to be respectful of it. And I think they're going to be. We won't know until we see the stories. And I see so many people online who are really, really upset about little details that they're seeing because they're so sure that these writers don't know Star Trek and they don't respect canon and they're going to throw everything out the door and they're going to do all kinds of crazy things that make no sense. I just really don't think that's going to be the case. You've got Nick Meyer, you've got Kirsten Beyer, you've got all these people who really know Star Trek and are good storytellers. They're not going to throw everything out the window. It's more likely that they're going to come up with connections that when you see it, you're going to go, wow, that was cool how they connected that. I never thought about it that way. That's more likely what's going to happen with good storytellers. And that's what I'm anticipating. So I'm not really concerned about the fact that it's set in this time period. And things like the blue uniforms and how they don't match up with what we saw in The Cage and they don't match up with what we saw in Where No Man Has Gone Before. In those two specific instances, as a professional creative myself, I think that you have to have some flexibility in how you tell a story and how you interpret past connections, because we're talking here, we're talking 50 years difference from when the creatives were working on these things. You can't throw the same uniforms from The Cage on the screen in 2017 and expect to pull that off and satisfy a broad audience. And for me, I started our Enterprise show here on the network, Warp 5, and I was the host of that for a couple of years. I really love Enterprise. And if you forget about The Cage, which was the first pilot and it was rejected and no one saw it for 20 years, and if you throw out Where No Man Has Gone Before, which was the first filmed episode after The Cage, and remember that in any TV show, the writers and the designers, they're finding the voice of the show and the voice of the characters, and they're figuring out the aesthetics. And you can look at any TV show in season 3, 4, 5 and see how it differs from season 1. So forget about the fact that they had those gold uniforms. What you should really be thinking about is the fact that we have 4 years of Enterprise with their blue uniforms. And if you look at the Discovery uniforms, you can see them as an evolution of the Enterprise blues. And we've already heard rumor from the creative staff that this is going to evolve into the colorful uniforms that we've seen in the original series. I don't know if that's true or not. I've heard it. But that's a good creative vision. If you take Enterprise and you build upon that part of the canon that's very well established for 4 years on television, and you bring that forward and you put the Discovery crew in these blue uniforms that have accents that are beginning to look like what we're more familiar with from the 23rd century. And if later you morph that in to the colors, it makes sense. And when you look back at it 10 years from now, it's going to seem completely natural. And you're going to think that, wow, now everything flows. So that's just one of my thoughts on the time period and the creative flexibility that I think we have to give the writers and the designers.
Okay, so now even though the uniforms, like you were saying, are a departure from what we saw in this era of with the cage and stuff like that, if you look at the props for this show, in particular the Starfleet props, while certainly an update for modern television, they, in my opinion, really do seem to capture the essence of those props, not just from the original series, but even specifically like the cage.
Mm-hmm.
They just released a video where they kind of get into detail with some of those props, and you really get to see some pretty close up stuff that they're doing there. What do you think about the props in that regard?
Well, I've only looked at them briefly. I did watch a video where they're going over the props, and I think they look great. I think that that's an example for all the people who say that this group of creatives don't really care about Star Trek and they're doing things that it's not Star Trek. This shows that they really do care, and they're going to great lengths to make these connections. They talked about the phasers. They talked about the similarity of the lines with the original phasers. You can see with the tricorder how it's updated, because the original tricorder, if you just put that out there right now, it's going to look cheap and flimsy, and it's far off from what we would expect an electronic device to look like. But they've done it in a way where it completely echoes that original tricorder. It has the detachable piece that you need to scan. It's quite faithful to the original, in my opinion, but as they also mentioned in the video that I watched, they are influenced by modern day industrial design. And I think that's important because that makes these objects feel real to us. And one thing about the Star Trek universe that makes it work for me compared to other franchises is that it seems real. Some of the things may be futuristic at the time that we're watching them, but they seem completely rooted in our own reality, and they seem real. And I'm glad to see that they're doing that. And another point that they made was that props can't appear to be handmade. They can't appear to be one-offs. They have to look like they've come from some sort of facility that's manufacturing these things in large volume, which they would be, to equip all of the officers in Starfleet, which means that they're all going to look exactly the same. If you take an iPhone, they all look exactly the same, right? Because Apple has such a detailed production process. And it would be the same thing for Starfleet if they're making tricorders or phasers or communicators. And they're paying attention to that when they create these. And that's going to make them feel more real than maybe the props we saw in the original series. However, they are taking their design cues from the original series. The communicators, yeah, they're updated a little bit, but they're very similar. They flip. They've got the same clicking sound when they flip them. I really like what I've seen so far. And again, it's limited because I'm trying not to delve too deeply into spoilers. But yeah, I like what they're doing with the props. And I personally think that it should make people who are concerned feel a little bit better.
Speaking of people who are concerned about things, one of the things I'd say probably the thing which has concerned some fans more than anything else in regards to Discovery is how they've decided to handle the Klingons, at least from a design standpoint.
Are those Klingons, Mike? I don't know. They don't look like Klingons to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're kind of weird, but whatever. They say they're Klingons, so we'll take their word for it. I mean, certainly as we've learned from, like Into Darkness, you can't always believe what, the people behind the scenes are telling you. Maybe they're going to be a bunch of augments or something. Who knows? But let's just assume for the moment that they're Klingons. What do you think about the way that they've been updated?
Okay, so I was, of course, kidding a moment ago, but seriously, when I first saw them, I thought, okay, these don't really look like Klingons. They look kind of like the JJ Klingons a bit, although we didn't get to see them that much either, so we don't really, we don't have that feeling about the Kelvin timeline Klingons that we do about the Klingons in the Prime timeline, which we just saw over and over and over with so many stories. However, one of the early things that I said, and Larry and I said when we were discussing them, is that, maybe these are Klingons that we've never encountered before. Because if you look at Earth, we have many races on Earth. We look different. I think any planet is likely to be that way. And it could just be that the Klingons that we're running into all the time, the ones that we have encountered in past Star Trek, are a specific group of Klingons from Kronos. And elsewhere on the planet, there could be other Klingons that, for whatever reason, they're not involved in these activities. They've moved off-world. You never know, right? And so these Klingons could be just a different race of Klingons. And apparently that's the case because some news came out a few days ago about the sarcophagus ship that we've been seeing in the trailers. And of course, a sarcophagus is, to water down the definition, basically it's a coffin. So a type of coffin. And originally it's a type of material that was used to make coffins. And so I don't want to go into a lot of details and a bunch of spoilers of some things that have been published on Trek news sites, but just to say that all the hoopla, all the arguments about the Klingons that has been going on for the past year has been caused by fans simply assuming that they've decided to redesign the Klingons for no reason, when in fact there is a reason. And there's a comment on one of the articles from a reader, and I'm only going to read the first sentence of it, but this person says, "The more we hear, the more it sounds like they've really thought through all of this a lot." And when I read it, I laughed because I was thinking, these are professional writers. These are professional designers. Of course they've thought through all of this. They just don't want to tell us the details of everything before the show comes on because they would kind of like for us to be surprised and enjoy it when it comes on television. And I just think fans forget that the creatives know what they're doing most of the time, right?
Yeah, you would hope so, right? And, we talked about this a few weeks back, right after Vegas, but, two of the people who are probably most directly involved with creating the look of the Klingons were there to discuss exactly what it was they were doing, and they broke down things in very, very specific detail, and you could tell that they really had thought everything through, from the biology to the aesthetics of their clothing and weaponry and everything. And it was also very clear that they're very, very knowledgeable and mindful of canon and how these fit into canon. So, yes, there is an update in terms of their look, and I think that, part of that is going to be explained by story. Part of it is going to be explained by the fact that it's 2017, right? But, yeah, I mean, I have total faith in them in terms of their design and in terms of it being true to what we've seen in the past.
Yeah. Well, and the Klingons have evolved over the course of the franchise. Of course, they evolved greatly from the original series to the motion picture. But even from the motion picture forward, the Klingons have evolved in subtle ways. Even Worf's makeup evolved quite a lot over the course of the Next Generation. So I don't think that details of head ridges or hair or no hair or things like this should be a factor that makes you say, those aren't Klingons. Those can't be Klingons. I'm starting to lose some of my hair right now. And eventually when I lose it all, if someone told me like, Chris, he's not a human. I mean, he doesn't have hair. I would be very offended by that.
And one of the things which Neville Page said when they were, discussing all this stuff, he's like, I've put hair on these Klingons. I've done it. And when you put hair on the Klingons, they look like Klingons,
Yeah.
So,
right, yeah.
and we never see the backs of their heads when they have hair. So,
and the thing about, you asked what I thought about the redesign, and then I went off on one of my little rants and down a rabbit hole.
It's fair.
I do think that saying that it's 2017, many things about the show, from the special effects to the starship designs and the way they're shot and the lighting, the props and so forth, you can definitely make a case and say, well, it's 2017, so you can't do it like you did in 1996 because it's not going to work for television these days. I think that's true for a lot of things. The Klingons, however, I think you could do the same Klingons that we were familiar with from the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, in 2017. Maybe just make the makeup a little more polished still, knowing that you're going to be shooting this in 4K and you're going to be able to see small imperfections. But that design still works fine. I don't think it was necessary to redesign the Klingons. That's why if they were redesigning them just simply because, it's a new TV show, let's come up with a new look for the Klingons, I would be a bit bothered by that. Not bothered like I'm going to go online and rant about it or I'm not going to watch the show, but I would have felt like that was probably not necessary. However, if you're doing it because it plays into the story, and these are some different Klingons, and maybe at some point we might see Klingons that look exactly like the Klingons from TNG and DS9. We probably will if these are different Klingons because they're going to need to differentiate them, right? That could happen. And so in that case, I'm fine with it. And yeah. The costumes, however. See, I wasn't at Star Trek Las Vegas, so I don't know what all they told you guys. I do believe that, they probably thought it through in great, great detail. I work in an ad agency and a creative agency, and it's exactly the kind of stuff we would do if we had to design something like that. We would get together in a room, we would brainstorm, we would go and research natural materials and other species of animals on Earth and all kinds of things to figure out how we were going to design their uniforms and the environment that they live in and their weapons and such. And we would come up with extremely detailed explanations, and it would all make perfect sense. And when you listen to the explanations, you would go, oh yeah, that's cool. I see how that represents this aspect of nature. And it's all wonderful. The only thing for me is that I think that in Star Trek and in science fiction in general, when they create items like this, clothing, uniforms, weapons, environments for non-human cultures, they kind of forget about practicality. They go overboard. When I look at the Klingon uniforms here, I'm just thinking that they wouldn't really wear something like this. How impractical would it be to wear this heavy meshed armor with spikes all over your shoulders? And the batleth, the new batleth, it's beautiful. It's a very interesting design, but I can't imagine anyone actually creating that as a weapon that they would use in battle, because you create a weapon for its practical use, not to be ornate. So if that batleth is some sort of special, it's an ornate batleth that's created as a work of art, I get it. But if that's what they're going to just fight with all the time, I think that, earlier I talked about how Star Trek feels real. That's one of its strengths, is that you can put yourself in that universe because the environment feels real. I think sometimes they step out of it when dealing with alien races. And so far what I've seen with the Klingons here, I feel like they may be crossing that line a little bit too much. But I will reserve judgment until I actually see the show. But yeah.
I see what you're saying. One thing which, they talked about at great length in Vegas, and you could kind of see in the few costumes that they had on display, was that, like you were saying, there are, I think it was like 37 different houses or something like that. And they're like, pretty much everything that you've seen has been from one house, right? And we're going to see, and like they did show a few examples of other things. Like there's that one picture of Cole, the Klingon that they had with, like, he's like holding the dagger and everything. And there's that one shot of him. He's from like the House of Kor, for example, and it's a different aesthetic, and they made a conscious effort to sort of like diversify the Klingons in that regard, but
which is great.
Yeah. So, but like, as far as like what you're saying with the weapons, like, I totally see what you're saying, but at the same time, unlike the Starfleet, phasers, which are going to be manufactured for everyone in the fleet, I really do get the impression that Klingons would sort of, fetishize their weapons in a sense, and really sort of like think of them as a piece of them, as an extension of themselves. And they would design them in that way because they would be very meaningful to them personally. Kind of like a baseball glove for an infielder, You don't let anyone else touch your glove.
From a baseball fan. Yeah. Well, and that makes sense. And yeah, I get that with the Klingons. And yeah, but you look at the Klingons in the past, and batleth has been smooth. Yeah, all the batleth designs have been pretty much the same. But at the same time, again, these are different Klingons, and again, I don't want to talk about some of the things that I've read because they would be spoilers. But the things that I've read about these Klingons would support what you're saying, that these people probably make their own stuff and have some sort of meaning behind having ornate weapons.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I guess we'll see. Now,
we'll find out.
One thing which I do want to go back to.
Oh, I want to say one more thing before we get away from that. You mentioned that pretty much everything we've seen so far from the Klingons in Star Trek has been from one house. I think a better way to think of it is, we've seen various houses, not just one house, but these are all houses that are together in one place. Like I think about medieval England, and you've got, different houses, but culturally they share a lot of similarities. Whereas if you were to, during that time period, go to China or go to Japan or go to North America with the native populations there, you would have seen very drastic differences in cultures and their living environments, their makeup, their clothing, their weapons, everything would be quite different. I think of it more like that. So like on Kronos, there must be pockets of Klingons in different parts of the planet that have drastically different cultures than the ones that we've been seeing all the time. And it's easy for us from the outside to look in and like group them all as Klingons, but if you were actually living on Kronos, you would really notice this great diversity amongst the people on your planet.
Yeah, no, what you're saying makes sense. I was actually referring to like what we've seen from Discovery, not like all Klingons.
Oh, what we've seen from Discovery,
Yeah.
is just from one house. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, okay. So going back to something that you talked about earlier in terms of like setting this in the prime timeline and it being part of sort of the larger continuity of the show and being able to make certain connections and stuff like that. I mean, one of the things which people have really been discussing pretty hardcore and which a lot of people are not tremendously happy about is the idea that the main character of this show, Michael Burnham, is the long-lost adoptive sister of Spock.
Right.
How do you feel about this show being so closely connected to, what is arguably like the most iconic character in the franchise, and that we've never heard of her before up until now?
Well, the fact that we've never heard of her before doesn't bother me because we never heard of Sybok until Star Trek V.
Yeah.
Right. And if you think about Spock, think about the original series. Kirk had been serving with Spock for quite a while, and suddenly Spock is like, oh yeah, by the way, my dad is the Vulcan ambassador to Earth. Yeah, I didn't tell you that.
That's totally true. It is a very realistic thing. I mean, we were talking about this somewhere else, and like, for example, with John, my co-host on Stage 9, the two of us have been podcasting together for a couple of years now. I literally could not tell you if he has any siblings. I honestly don't know.
Right. Yeah, that could happen, right?
Yeah.
So it's not a surprise. And then a little bit later in the original series, Spock is like, oh yeah, that woman on the screen, that's my wife, right?
Yeah.
So,
it's Spock. That's what he does.
It's no surprise, right? So I don't have any problem with the fact that he has an adopted sister that we didn't know about. From a creative standpoint, however, I feel like it's a little bit of an unnecessary crutch. I feel like they're reaching for some justification for the show to connect it to fans, as if the concept of Discovery alone isn't strong enough. And so they have to bring in some connection. So first we learned that there was Sarek. We knew they were casting Sarek. We didn't know what his role was going to be. And then we find out that, well, okay, so the deal with Sarek is that he's adopted this human who's grown up on Vulcan, and she's Spock's half-sister, adopted sister. I feel kind of like this is very unnecessary. I feel like you could have Michael Burnham being a human who ended up on Vulcan somehow and grew up there, and that would be enough. The Sarek connection is not necessary. If the whole point is that she thinks like a Vulcan, which is sort of my impression, she's caught between two worlds. This is the classic Spock thing, right? So Michael Burnham is caught between two worlds. She's a human, but she grew up on Vulcan, and she thinks more like a Vulcan. But because she also understands humanity, she's going to be this bridge that brings sides together. That's the basic gist of what I've gained from what I've heard so far. Again, I have to see the show. I'm not going to pass judgment on any of this until I see the show. But if that's the point, it's not necessary for her to be Spock's adopted half-sister and for Sarek to be the Vulcan who raised her. That just feels to me like a bit of a crutch. And bringing in Harry Mudd, what's the point? The fact that he's there is fine. The people that are upset because they think Harry Mudd is a womanizer or whatever, that was in 1960s. Just let them tell this story. You don't need to get upset about that. I just don't think Harry Mudd is necessary. Now, he might be great. We might watch the show and go, oh, I see why they chose Mudd. That makes a lot of sense. I never thought about that. And Rainn Wilson might do a great job, and we'll say, oh, I love this version of Mudd. But just looking from the outside, when we don't know what his role is in the story, it seems like a little bit of an odd choice. And then you hear a lot of talk about, well, would they bring this character in? Would they bring this character in? For me, I've never liked that. I've never liked trying to find ways to pull characters in from past Star Trek and put them into other shows. It's one of my criticisms of the literary universe, which I love, but one of the criticisms I have of it is that often you get this small universe syndrome that creeps in where everybody, it happens on the TV show as well, actually, but everybody knows everybody. Well, if the galaxy is really that large, if the Alpha Quadrant is that large, and Starfleet is such a huge organization with so many ships, and you've got all these people going through the academy every year, and then you've got people that are 10 or 20 years apart in age, why would everybody know everybody? Why would everyone be encountering everyone all the time? That doesn't make sense, and that's one of the things that detracts from making Star Trek feel real, like a real world too. And that's one reason why I've never been a fan of just trying to pull in a character to one of the other series just for the sake of doing it, to make a connection. So I guess I would say I kind of hope they don't bring in any other familiar characters. But then again, I don't want to say that, because if they have a legitimate reason for doing it and it helps the story and they can do it in a way where it makes sense, then I'm fine with that.
It's really interesting to me, and this is something which I'm really curious to see how it happens, but I'm also really curious to see, years from now when all the info comes out, like what the original concept for this show was. Because there was an interview that Fuller did, over a year ago at this point, I think, where they asked him, like, flat out, like, are you going to have people from the original series or whatever from the other shows? And he said, not now, not in season 1. We want to get we want to get everything in order, and then maybe in season 2 we'll start doing this. And now you look at the premise of this show, and that does not at all fit with what he was saying. So, yeah. and then there was also just recently an interview with Aaron Harberts on StarTrek.com where he doesn't get into specifics, but he kind of says like, oh yeah, we've got a lot of fans who are working on the show. Akiva Goldsman said, I want a tribble. I'm going to put a tribble in this episode. Someone else on the staff said, oh, we need to use Harry Mudd, and then we found a good way to use him, and stuff like that. It almost feels like once Fuller left, they kind of like regrouped and said, how can we make this connect more to what everyone knows and loves? Like it almost feels like, and this is just pure speculation on my part, but it almost feels like they made a conscious effort to do that once they started to reshape this show.
Yeah. Well, and if you want to make a case to support why they would do that, you can look at Enterprise, and it could be a lesson learned from Enterprise that in season 4, when Manny Coto came in and started truly connecting that series with the original series, that's when more of the fans bought into the concept. I personally love the original concept of Enterprise, and I think seasons 1 and 2 in particular are fantastic. And I don't miss the stronger connection to the original series. But knowing that a lot of fans did, it could be that once Fuller left, they said, we get what Brian was trying to do, but remember what happened with Enterprise? Maybe we should work in a few more connections here.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting.
You could also argue that Sarek and Mudd are not actually characters from the original series because they aren't the crew.
Sure.
Right? They're just peripheral characters that came in a couple times here and there. And you could argue that when he said we're not going to have characters, he meant we're not going to bring Kirk in or Spock or Uhura or someone like that.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. So, okay, just to wrap this up, we've been living with this show in its development for
like 5 years, it feels like.
And here we are, final thoughts, like literally before, this is the last podcast we're going to have dealing with Discovery prior to the release of the show. So any final thoughts before actually seeing this thing?
Okay, well, for final thoughts, I think I'll start by reading David Mack's 13-part tweet storm from yesterday as we're recording this. David Mack, good friend of the network here, comes on Literary Treks all the time to talk to us about his books and is a brilliant Star Trek mind. And his books are always New York Times bestsellers. And he has written the first Discovery novel. And he actually knows what's going on Discovery. Now, he's not going to give away any information, but I did like what he said. And he tweeted, "Every day I see clickbait blog articles predicting doom and gloom for Star Trek CBS, and I have to tell you, I'm sick of them." 1 of 13. So now you know there's a bunch of stuff coming. And then he goes on to say, "Let me preface what I'm about to say by telling you I won't give you any spoilers for what's coming up in Season 1 of Discovery. I have had the privilege of being in the loop on story development and script distribution of Discovery since day one." Of course, in the tweets, he's doing at Star Trek CBS because that's the name of the Discovery account. I'm going to substitute that for Discovery here so it makes more sense. "I also coordinated with Kirsten Beyer and the rest of the Star Trek room while writing the first Discovery original novel. Want to know my prediction for what's coming on Discovery? Here it is, the best first season of a Star Trek series ever. I'm not kidding. Season 1 of Discovery will be the most tonally and continuity consistent first season of a Star Trek series ever. There is a more coherent and consistently well-executed vision behind Discovery than Star Trek has ever had before. The team in the Star Trek room, that's the writer's room, is a goddamn dream team, and we're lucky to have these folks at the helm. Showrunners Gretchen J. Berg and Aaron Harberts are killing it on Discovery. Griffin Metal, Ext Space, and Carter Hall are bringing their A-games. Know who else is on staff at Discovery? New York Times best-selling Star Trek author Kirsten Beyer and Craig Sweeney, one of TV's best writers. The show didn't embargo reviews, and this is the thing, like some people have had a conspiracy theory going on here. David says, the show didn't embargo reviews because they're afraid or ashamed. This team is bursting with pride to show you what they've achieved. The team at Discovery is just trying to contain the inevitable spoilers for as long as they can, so you can share their wonder. Stop predicting doom and gloom. A new era of Star Trek is soon to dawn, and when it does, you will sing this team's praises as I do. So that's what he wrote. In the controversy, some people, because CBS did not send out copies of the pilot to media for review, like often happens with TV shows and movies. And so there's this conspiracy that it's so bad that they don't want anyone to review it ahead of time because then no one will watch. I mean, that's complete nonsense. It's perfectly within their right, and it's quite reasonable with a franchise like Star Trek to not do that. You know, I work in media, in magazines, and when The Force Awakens came out, at that time, the magazine that I was running was an entertainment magazine here in Tokyo. And normally we get to see movies several months before they're released in the theater so we can write reviews. Well, Disney did not screen The Force Awakens. We could not see it. Well, they didn't do it because they thought The Force Awakens is bad. They did it because it's Star Wars. People are going to come see the movie. We don't need people to review it ahead of time. People are anticipating this film being released. Let's just protect the spoilers so people can enjoy it in the theater. That's what I would do if I were CBS. I would not send Discovery out for people to screen ahead of time and write reviews of it and get all the spoilers out. One thing that struck me when I was reading comments about the Orville, a lot of the comments were, you know, they spoiled all the funny parts in the teasers. Because in the trailers and the teasers, I guess they took all the jokes and they stuck them in there. Well, that's what happens, right? It happens all the time with movies. And if you're going to create a lot of teasers and a lot of trailers in advance and you're going to keep giving away material, people are naturally going to be let down when they watch it for the first time because they're going to recognize all the things already. And you don't want to spoil that. So that's largely David's point. And I share David's optimism, to get back to my final thoughts, my personal ones. I've had my doubts here and there about what they're doing along the way over this however many years it's been. It feels like ages now that we've been following the development of this show. But again, as a professional creative, I don't get all hung up on it like so many fans do who rant about it on Facebook and Twitter and everywhere, because I understand the creative process and the flexibility that you have to have if you're going to keep telling stories, especially set in the same universe for 51 years now. You can't, you have to let writers have flexibility, and design has to evolve with the time. But the more that I'm seeing and the more that I'm hearing, for me, I feel like they've thought it all out. They've put together something that I'm confident that when we get to episode 15 and we look back at that first season, we're going to say, okay, they knew what they were doing. They knew where the potential pitfalls were in connecting this to Star Trek, and they addressed that. And they did it in a way that makes sense, and they took some creative liberties, and they did a few things that maybe, that was a bit of a stretch, perhaps. And then they did some things where that was brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? That's how I think I'll probably feel when I get to episode 15. And bottom line, I have complete faith in people like Kirsten, people like Nick Meyer. They love Star Trek. And if you didn't like Voyager, for example, go read Kirsten's Voyager books. They've turned so many people who didn't like Voyager into Voyager fans because of her ability to tell a good story and to do something with characters that other people weren't able to do. So you should have faith in people like that. That's, I guess, my final thought. And don't complain about it online. Just wait till you see it. Right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, my standard line anytime that I'm arguing with someone about movies that aren't out yet, my prediction for everything is that it will be released and we will all watch it, and it will be either good or bad.
Yeah, right. And then we can talk about it, right? However, Mike, okay, so as you know, we are probably the two longest running podcasters on Trek FM. I think you've been podcasting longer than me, probably, because when did you and Max start commentary Track Stars?
It was like 2010.
Yeah, so I started end of 2010. So we've both been podcasting for a really long time. Can you imagine how boring our shows would be if we didn't speculate on anything, though? So
for sure, and it's a lot of fun. And I mean, it's been really, really fun, sort of like tracking the development of this show. Because I mean, that's something that I've never done before. Because I mean, the internet hasn't existed in the way that it is now,
right,
for any other Star Trek show, not even really Enterprise. And it's certainly been a rocky road, in terms of getting this show on the air. And certainly, I would love to see Brian Fuller, still at the helm, get to, share his vision for this thing. But given circumstances, being what they are, I don't have any less confidence in the fact that this product is going to be good. I mean, you've spoken to David Mack before on numerous occasions. I've talked to him as well. Does he seem like the person? Now, I understand that he has a personal stake in the success of Discovery, but does he seem like the type of person who would go out of his way to heap false praise on something just in order to advance an agenda?
No, not at all. In fact,
not at all.
The thing about David, I mean, he's, when it comes to his storytelling, consummate professional, he understands the art. And when he's telling you that he knows everything that's gone on since day one, he believes that it's going to be the most solid season, the most solid storytelling that we've had, certainly for a first season. I believe him because there's a reason why his books sell so well because he's a great storyteller. And I certainly trust him to be able to identify other great storytellers.
And he's certainly a Star Trek fan himself and knows
Absolutely.
the franchise just as well as anyone else.
But also a Star Trek fan who's not afraid to evolve the Star Trek universe. Right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
So I guess my very, very, very final thought when I said that our podcasts would be quite boring if we didn't speculate is that I get that fans want to chat and speculate online. I'm disappointed that it so frequently devolves into arguing and fighting and name calling over something that no one involved actually has any factual information about because it hasn't come on yet. So I wish people wouldn't do that, but I certainly understand the excitement and the desire to talk about it. But the thing about Star Trek is all about being open-minded. Star Trek is about diversity. It's about being open-minded. And if you're a Star Trek fan and you're not open-minded about new possibilities, I feel like you've missed a little bit of the point of the message of Star Trek. And I just encourage everyone who feels that way, like they're so certain that the Klingons can only look one way and we can't possibly ever change that, be more open-minded about it because the universe is full of unexpected things. And Star Trek is all about broadening our minds and broadening our horizons.
For sure. And, while it has been very fun, and I mean, I'd say probably more than anyone else on the network, I've speculated on, what's going on with the show. So I don't want to be hypocritical in saying, like, why would anyone do that? Because it has been a lot of fun doing that. But I'm also very excited by the fact that this conversation that we've been having for the past 5 years or whatever it is while this show has been in development is now
feels like it
is now going to change from what are we going to see to what did we just see, and that's really cool. It's definitely very, very exciting. So Chris, I mean, it's been great to hear your thoughts on Discovery and also, how it fits into the franchise on the whole and everything like that. And it would be really cool if we could hear your thoughts on that subject as the show progresses. So, I don't know. I mean, do you have any ideas for how we might be able to do that?
Well, at first, of course, I thought that maybe I should be a host on The Edge when we were planning that show. And that show was in planning for a very long time. People just didn't know it. But of course, I live in Tokyo, and I'm rarely home in the first place. So it's completely impractical for me to be part of The Edge. And then I thought, we're adding these little sub-shows like Postcards from The Edge, and we've got our live show, we've got the commentary show, and I thought, we don't have enough sub-shows for The Edge. Maybe I should have a sub-show as well. So
yeah.
So that's what I'm going to do. And actually, all of these sub-shows were planned at the same time. We've just been revealing them bit by bit over the past month or so. So my show is probably going to be rather short, and I'm going to share my thoughts on the episode each week since I won't be able to do it on the main show. But what I also want to do to make my little contribution a bit more meaningful is to talk about some of the things we've talked about today, where I look and find the ways in which the writers and the creative staff are connecting Discovery to the broader Star Trek universe, whether it be props or whether it be Klingon culture or something else about Starfleet or dropping the name of a planet, or you never know what they're going to do, but just little things like that. And just compile my notes from The Edge and share those with everyone every week. So I'll be contributing my own little sub-show to the increasingly busy feed of The Edge. So the thing about our Discovery show here on Trek FM is that you're going to be getting some kind of Discovery coverage pretty much every day of the week.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if we just want to recap, Discovery is released on Sunday or Monday, depending on what part of the world you're living in. Monday evening will be our live show, Live from the Edge, where Brandy and Bruce give our initial thoughts on the episode that we just saw, and do
as they're watching it right there in the moment. So it's not going to be like I've sat around and thought about this episode for a while.
It's going to be kind of like a scene by scene sort of like journey through the thing, and sort of almost stream of conscious sort of
now,
stuff.
Are they going to watch it on the CBS All Access that does have commercials so that they can also comment on the commercials?
I don't know. We'll have to ask them about that. I'm not sure. So that'll be, Monday nights, it'll air live, and then on Tuesday mornings it'll be in your feeds so that you can listen to it on your way to work if you missed the live show the night before.
We should go back on the live show, though, and just explain on the air here why that's happening on Monday night now instead of on Sunday.
Yes, we should. We thought, we did our research and looked into all this stuff, and we're trying to figure out patterns and looking at what they did with the good fight and all this stuff. And we thought for sure that these new episodes were going to drop, at 3 a.m. Eastern on Sunday mornings. Well, it turns out that it's going to be 8:30 p.m. on Sunday nights Eastern time. So, trying to get a show on the air that quickly would be very difficult, especially since everyone's probably going to be watching Talking Trek right afterwards. So we figured it makes more sense to wait a day. Everyone else in the world will have a chance to watch it by then too. So,
So that's the reason, Mike, because I heard something a little bit different. I heard that Brandy and Bruce were actually hosting Talking Trek, and they weren't available on Sunday night.
Well, they haven't announced
wrong?
that officially yet.
Oh.
But if you tune into Talking Trek and Brandy and Bruce are on there, then I guess that'll answer your question.
Okay, so that's why we have the live show on Monday night, and you'll, of course, have it in your feeds on Tuesday. And then so let's go from there. What's next?
So next on Wednesday will be Tracks from the Edge, which is our commentary track show, where I will be hosting that one along with guests from around the network and other people. And, you'll be able to watch the episode with us. On Thursday, as has been already happening for a few weeks now, Amy is hosting Postcards from the Edge, which is our mailbag show where Amy goes through the thoughts of listeners and what they feel about what they just saw. So that's definitely an exciting show as well.
And we should point out that once Discovery starts, that is going to be a mailbag about Discovery every week. Right now, Amy's been leading up to what do you remember about Next Generation and DS9 and Voyager? And that's just to prepare the concept.
Right.
But it will be a mailbag show just about Discovery.
Right.
After the show premieres.
After you watch the episode, go on to the Babel conference, find Amy's thread, and give us your thoughts, and then she'll read them on the air. And then Friday is going to be the main show, The Edge, where we're probably going to end up usually kind of like splitting it into, two parts, where, one part will be our, sort of more thorough, thoughtful review of the episode from that week. And then the other half will be whatever sort of news item or whatever is going on in the world of Discovery, whether it's talking about how David Mack's book ties into the episodes that we just saw, or whether it's about how this new person, a new character has been revealed, or to be coming up, or whatever it is. Who knows what it is? We don't know because it hasn't happened yet. But that's what the main show will become in a sense. And then Saturdays, Notes from the Edge with Chris. So,
yep, wrapping it up, and then we'll start the cycle over.
Sounds exhausting, but it'll be worth it.
But it's going to be really interesting because we've been podcasting here on Trek FM for 7 years now, and this is the first time we're going to be following something as it unfolds like this as a TV series. So
Yeah, it's
new experience for us too.
Definitely. And, with all these shows, one of the reasons why we have all these different, variations on basically talking about, an hour of television is so that we can get as many voices as we can involved. And you'll hear a lot of people from around the network talking on these various shows. And I think that'll be really exciting for people too.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, Chris, where can people find you when you're not on the edge?
You can find me riding the train back and forth to the office here in Tokyo. That's about all I do these days. I have 2 shows here on the network, The Ready Room, where we talk about all 5 live-action Star Trek series, and we rotate through, starting with TOS, and then we hit Enterprise in the 5th one of those and go back through the cycle. And sometimes we do special shows. Larry Nemechek joins me quite often, and sometimes to talk about an episode from a series, and sometimes to talk about something special like we've done with Discovery. And then I do The Orb, which is our dedicated Deep Space Nine show, which I co-host with Matthew Rushing. Both of these are a bit irregular right now in terms of release. As people who follow the network know, I've been going through a lot of health issues for the past year, and I've had many, many eye surgeries, and it's just been quite difficult for me to podcast, so I do it when I can, but I'm not able to do it as regularly, especially when I have to coordinate time zones with people in the US. That's quite difficult. Notes from the Edge, it's just me, so I will be able to manage that. But if you do want to hear me, you can hear me on both of those shows, and if you go far back into the catalog, you'll hear me on like 7 or 8 different shows that I used to host. Quite a lot of stuff. But that's what I do on the network. You can also find my writing on the official website at StarTrek.com. Just search for my name, C Bryan Jones, Bryan with a Y. That's also my username on Twitter and on Facebook and pretty much everywhere, C Bryan Jones. And that's pretty much where I am, Mike, these days.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's looking forward to hearing you on a more regular basis and hearing you discuss Discovery. And it's exciting times. So thank you very much for joining me today, and thank you very much for doing Notes from the Edge. And I can't wait to listen.
Great, I'm looking forward to it.
It's been fun talking about Star Trek Discovery today, but that's not all we're talking about on Trek FM this week. So here's a look at what you may have missed elsewhere on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, Melodic Treks.
I really like the two Fairhaven episodes that we got. I know a lot of people are either very hot on these episodes or very cold on them. They've never bothered me. I think they're a lot of fun, and they're silly, but whatever. But one of the things that's really cool about them is we get something different in the musical field for Star Trek with this wonderful Irish-style music.
Earl Grey.
Well, I just noticed mine deals with all naked people.
Richard!
Wow! All right.
Wait a minute. Oh, Justice Tapestry. You're right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
I just noticed that. I was like, oh.
There's nudity in each of those episodes.
Well done.
TVMA.
Warp 5.
It was a weekly thing. It was originally on Tuesdays. At some point, Tripp decided to make it a nightly thing, or at least that was his idea, but then it went back to a weekly thing. I'm like, that sounds just like my life, because this is the type of thing where it's like, yeah, you get together every Tuesday, and then you gotta wait a whole week, and at some point you're like, we should be doing this every day.
To the journey!
Yeah, I mean, the way that he behaves towards B'Elanna is kind of... He gets a bit creepy there.
Well, he gets punched too, just like Joe Carey, so...
He does. B'Elanna makes a habit of punching her staff.
It's team building. It's like trust falls.
It is team building. maybe it's like some kind of exciting club.
Yeah, I've been punched by B'Elanna Club.
I've been punched by B'Elanna, and I'm obviously now in the inner circle. Engineering.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out these shows and discover what we're talking about in your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on your iPhone or iPad or Apple TV or on the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they're published. And please leave us a star rating and a review. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and in most third-party apps. And you can also stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place to join in the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, that's B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and we'll come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select The Edge. That will come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. We'd like to thank our associate producers today, Norman C. Lau, Tony Robinson, Thomas Pulio, Lisa Slack, and Shoaib Mirza. Thank you very much, everyone, for your support. If you want to be like them, head on over to patreon.com/TrekFM and become a patron of the network. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce and distribute these shows each month, and we really appreciate any support you can give us and hope you'll join the team. Again, you can find all the info at patreon.com/TrekFM. Well, that's it for this week's episode of The Edge. Next week, hey, we're going to have new Star Trek, so be sure to tune in for The Edge.